Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Relationship Talks. I am your host, Laurie Brooke, and together we will get to take a look at what goes on behind closed doors. Today, I am joined by Abigail Luvisi.
Hi, my name is Abigail Luvisi, and I'm here to talk about relationships and what my relationships have been like through my life thus far.
Abigail is a certified mindset mentor in Arizona. She works with women, equipping them to know their worth, gain community through group mentorship, and stop feeling powerless. Abigail understands how debilitating it can be when we feel like we're not enough, when we feel we can only rely on ourselves or not feel like we can trust ourselves and feel out of control. Abigail gives you the tools you need to know your worth and how to move forward authentically, finding the peace and joy you desire in life. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining me on another episode of Relationship Talks. As you heard in the introduction, I am here with Abigail, and she is here to talk about all of the relationships that she has experienced through her life, and they have been rich and they have been full of challenges and triumphs. And I'm really interested to get to know what has led her to be here in front of me today. Thank you so much for joining me today, Abigail.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
I am really keen to chat to you. When you messaged me and gave me a bit of an outline of, I suppose, what your life has been like so far, I thought, my goodness, you've got so many stories to share. So, can you start back from the very beginning, talking about your childhood and your family home back then, or childhood home, as I'll call it? Um, what was that like for you and those relationships?
Oh man. They were back in my childhood relationships, it was very emotionally neglectful and distant, um, confusing. It was a mind fuck. It's very much of like I love you, but there's always like something else to the other side. So again, I was raised in a very narcissistic mother, which led me to be in a narcissistic marriage.
Yep.
And when you're not taught those boundaries of what love should look like and what love is, and then I also had this aspect of God being in this spiritual abuse too. I was raised in a very Pentecostal home. Do you know what that is?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, so I was raised in a very Pentecostal home, which, like, religion aside, like, cool. It's just I was raised in this like, you don't do this, you're going to hell. Like, do you have sex, like, you're going to hell, you are a sinner. Or even as a very small child, when I wouldn't finish things, I would be punished like physically. And I would have to write I'd have to write out scriptures if I like with my mom would make me write out scriptures if I didn't do what I was told that day to like show. So you could see it was very like it was not cool. It wasn't okay. So it was very much like, oh, like you're supposed to love God. Oh, I love you. I'm doing all of this because I love you, which as a child, it's like, you know what I mean? Then my messages that I start to believe is something's really wrong with me.
Yep.
Like I have to make you happy. I'm defective. So if this is all me and you're telling me that you love me, but I'm the problem, that's what I started to seek out in all of my relationships.
Yep. What is your
Friendships,
relationship like now with your mum?
weird, no contact.
No contact. And when
So
did
I
you
just
make that decision?
about a year ago. It took me a year. And I like only up to a year ago. I mean, we've definitely had like the Rockies, like I've created huge boundaries just in the last 7 years, but it wasn't until last year that I really was like done. And unfortunately, I did even have to talk to her recently cuz my dad is estranged. We're estranged and he just passed away. So that created this whole other like layer to those relationships of having to communicate again with my mom over something that my mom and dad have been divorced since I was like 5 because he was in prison most of my life. So that's like a whole other there's so much. It's like, where how do I compartmentalize this?
So what has you started to lead into it before that I suppose the relationship that you had with your mother is what led you to seek out relationships like that from friends and then from partners. So, what
Mhm.
did that look like for you?
Yeah, I didn't even like realize, obviously we learn these things as we get older. And as I started to go deeper into therapy myself, and when I was in a narcissistic and my ex-husband was a sex addict as well, which my father was a sex addict. So I didn't know obviously till later on. So just like seeing how even though I wasn't present with my dad, like how that still came and passed down to me,
Yeah.
seeking out those things, right? Will you repeat the question? I lost my train of thought.
How did the I suppose your relationship with your mother impact those relationships that you were seeking out?
Yeah, I almost because I didn't again like understand what was going on with my mom, it was almost like a band-aid. So I started getting really promiscuous in high school. And because I just was seeking out, any way to be loved. And so it definitely showed because again, that physical aspect of like wanting to be present when my mom was so neglectful, like she would go and lock herself in the room to be with God, but I couldn't be there. So just like even that like physical distance
Yep.
of like being apart and like realizing that like, oh, like I just was putting a band-aid on because I got married when I was 17. I was almost 18. So it's hard to say like where the line was because it was so blurry. You know what I mean? Like it just like seeped right in. Like my ex-husband and my mom like cross over so deeply almost because that mother relationship didn't end or you know what I mean like until 7 8 years ago
Mm.
like noticing that it impacted everything.
Do you think when you got married at 17, were you getting married because you thought religiously that's what you had to do? Or because you were seeking that love and affection and you thought that that's where it came from?
Yeah. I think for I think looking back for sure I just wanted to be loved and I thought that that's just what I was looking for. I wanted someone to love and take care of me. I mean, most of the time when I was a kid, the only times I would really feel loved were when I was sick. So I'd stay home from school. I missed so much school because that was the times my mom would actually take care of me. So, even in my when I got married to my husband, like again, those thoughts were still there. Oh, when I'm sick, you will take care of me. But I mean, that for sure didn't happen. It was like the opposite, but also just a mind fuck, a different version of it.
Get through all of this.
What was that you cut out?
Sorry, how did you get through all of this?
I mean, that is also a great question. There was definitely a point when I was going through my divorce that I didn't want to get through it. I mean, I remember the day. I mean, it's kind of hard to not remember those moments where you just don't want to get through it anymore. And I was at my brother's house, who I also have gone no contact with, and they sat me down, my brother, his wife, so my sister-in-law and my ex-husband, to all tell me how horrible of a mom I was. And this was like right when we were starting the divorce process. And I left and I drove away and I was like, don't want to live anymore. Like, I want to be done. And a song came on the radio, and it just, for some reason, it got me out. Like, but I was ready to be done. Like, it was difficult. And then, I mean, from there, my ex-husband and I, like, we were going back and forth. When you have 3 kids together and you're in a, domestic violence, emotionally abusive relationship, like, we get caught, and it's hard to see what you can't see when you're in it. So you go back and you think that, again, like, it's you. So you just get in the cycle. And so we started going to, I'm always the person and have always been the person that's like, again, because of where I was raised and thinking it's me, I will seek out, like, okay, how can I better myself? And so that's what I did. I always was in therapy and always into self-help and helping others. And um, we started going to this group for sex addicts and wives of betrayal. And that's really where everything changed for me. It was the first time I sat in a room with people who were like, knew what narcissism was and knew what sex addiction was and the crazy making. And I was like, oh my gosh, there are other people like me. Like, this is crazy. Like, I'm not alone. And it just gave me life to know that I wasn't in it alone anymore. And that's where things really shifted.
And so is that the point where you decided to part ways completely? Or did that take extra time?
No, he decided to leave the relationship. And it's so funny. I think it's funny now because because I'm just so loyal that I used to like think it was awesome that I didn't leave. Like, I was like, I didn't leave the relationship. Like, I'm teaching my kids like what loyalty is and to be a good wife and to be a good mother. And I look back now and I'm like, I was an idiot. Like, no, like, I can't believe that I used to be like, oh yeah, good on you, Abigail, for not leaving that relationship. Like, no, I can't believe it took him leaving me. I like what? I would never like look at my kids today and be like, that was okay. Never.
But that shows, I suppose, the progression you have made in terms of
Absolutely.
your self-love and your self-worth.
Oh yeah. I would not put up with that shit for a second today. Like, my husband now, like, like, we, you know what I mean? When we were dating, I said that I wouldn't move in with him until he was going to therapy for a year. Like, I had huge non-negotiables. And people you hear all the time, they're like, oh, like, don't set up ultimatums. Like, I'm like, it's probably like what they say, like, my opinion is different than other people. And the fact that I think non-negotiables and ultimatums are okay as long as your motive is in the right place. If it's to keep you safe, then I don't care. Like, who cares then? If it's for you, if you're not doing it to control the other person, then you're not, you know what I mean? Like, it's not there to be malicious. You're going, hey, like, I need this to be happening and it needs to look this way to keep me safe. And if not, like, peace out.
Yep. And not just you at the end of the day, too. You had 3 kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have to be very mindful of who you're bringing into their life as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And he was the first one, I mean, that I ever brought into their lives, which was also terrifying when you get back into a new relationship.
So how long was it after your separation and with your ex that you met your husband, Daniel?
So it's funny, we actually knew each other while we both were previously married, but it was totally like platonic. I worked at a coffee shop and he was a customer of mine. Yeah, so I mean, we actually went through our divorces the same time and he disappeared for like a year, which we both were like separate, you know what I mean? Like, and it was a year later he started kind of like coming back and I kind of started noticing him. And then it was like we would start talking and stuff. And then probably a year after that was when we started like talking and dating. So it was wild. It's crazy to think about. And then
And what
we dated for, you know what I mean? We've been married now. It's hard with the timeline, but we've been married now a year and a half. And we were together 2 years before we got married. So
awesome.
yeah.
So what changed for you in that period in terms of what did you do to make sure that you were in a better place when you re-entered a relationship?
Therapy. Right, lots of therapy. Yeah, I mean, really just work. I think this is what I really, again, maybe unpopular opinion. There it is, unpopular opinion. I really do believe that a lot of relationship issues, disagreements, really are based off of ourself.
Mhm.
Um, so when, my husband and I get in an argument, like, what is it that's coming up for me? And what got hit? What wound of mine got hit? What belief am I happening is happening around that and slowing down because it's probably happening to him too. Well, it is. So in that moment, we're both having our own things going on and then we're hurting each other. And that's really the only part that it connects, right? Is that I'm hurting him because of my own stuff and he's hurting me because of his stuff. But we really just want to connect.
Yep. It's like that mirror, like the mirror analogy. When there's an issue there, it's something that's being reflected back at you that you need to work on.
Yeah, exactly.
And so identifying that and being able to work through it. Um, but I'm curious, in that period of time, you've gone to therapy, but you were still maintaining a relationship of some description with your mother and potentially your brother at that point too.
No, that situation that I told you about with my brother was the last time
Okay.
I spoke with him. So I like cut off. I mean, if you I don't know if you have mommy wounds, but those ones go deep. It was a lot easier for me to cut off my brother like when that happened than it was my
Yep.
mom.
Yep. So how did you navigate that?
I mean, it's still difficult. My ex-husband is actually best friends with my brother to this day. So it gets triggered all the time. Even this week, I think it was last night or this morning, my ex-husband was like, "Hey, I'm going to have a party for, our oldest daughter cuz like I said she just turned 12. I want to invite your brother. Like, are you cool with that?" And he wouldn't normally ask that, but I have full custody right now. So he has to like, so again, that's a whole other story, but like it's triggering, right? Like knowing that my brother picked him over me. And again, those core beliefs of like, oh, you picked him over me, like something has to be wrong with me. And even though I've worked so much on that and I chose to cut the relationship, that doesn't mean that doesn't get triggered, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
It's
It's the
easier as I work on it.
How do you, I suppose, what do you and Daniel have in place to make sure that when issues do come up, that you are able to slow down and work through what's going on for each of you and then come back together?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really for taking breaks. They say that it takes 20 minutes once you go into fight, flight, and freeze to get back into your frontal cortex. And if we're in our limbic, like we can't think at that point. So we need to cool off. So that's really, what we do. We communicate so much that, I can tell if he's starting to get heightened and he probably doesn't tell as much when I'm starting to get heightened because I would say that I am better at that than he. He would agree with me.
Of course he
But
would.
he would. But yeah, so usually like I for sure can tell in my body if I'm starting to freak out. So I'm like, all right, like I need to cool off. I need to take 20. And in the beginning, I used to have like systems in place. Like I had a self compassion creed and, I had this toolbox for myself to that I would go to if I was getting heated, like to help me get back, right? Like quicker. So I would reach out to a friend, call them. Like there, I have, now it's just like the back of my hand. But in the beginning, it was difficult, right? Because when we have shame to reach out to people, it can be hard, especially if I did something too. Like if I was the one yelling or the one frustrated, like it's hard to say, like, hey, I fucked up. Like I need help. I need to talk about this. So, but now it's a lot easier.
It is very hard. Like our egos have so much to answer for, don't they? When it comes to the role that we play in our relationships and not wanting to always be vulnerable or feel like we've made a mistake.
Yeah, well, I mean, vulnerability breeds vulnerability, but the thing is with vulnerability is we have the opportunity to get hurt. So, I can be vulnerable here. Somebody might out there might not like what I have to say and could backlash, right? Like that's the what we do when we choose to be vulnerable. And at the end of the day, again, vulnerability has the opportunity to breed connection though. And so is it that greater for me to be vulnerable, to have connection and for somebody to not feel alone? Well, absolutely.
That's a lot of growth there for you, though.
Oh yeah. And I still got a lot and I'm young.
But we never
I'm
stop
only
growing.
31.
Never stop growing. So,
Yeah,
how
never.
has your childhood and what you've been through changed the way that you parent?
I mean, it's night and day, right? Like I didn't know what a feeling was when I was growing up or that I could have them or was allowed to feel them. I mean, everything I do is different. My kids and I really could sit them all down with you and I really am proud of the fact that I know that they would tell you that they trust me 100%. And I'm so proud of that. I'm proud to know that like my kids and I are vulnerable and curious and love each other for who one another is. And they are so different. And that's crazy too. Like knowing that just like people in the world, it's so interesting to see like how different they are. So other people are different, but having them in your own home and learning how to have dialogue and communicate and have problems and I mean, everything is different. Everything. That's really hard because I was raised, as you heard, like so hardcore. It was, so rigid on one side of the pendulum and so chaotic on the other side. And it would swing, by the minute in my childhood. And now I have systems and I communicate and we have boundaries and open communication. So it's vastly different.
Was that a conscious decision that you made when you became a parent, or is that something that has evolved as you have evolved?
I mean, I can say that, there definitely was, things like, oh, I will never be like my mom when I got into my marriage, but like obviously not understanding how unhealthy I was then, like, there were things I knew I wanted to do differently, although it wasn't until, I started again my own healing that I could see that, oh, things really need to shift and I need to work on myself and, change. Obviously for me, like physical was like a no-go from the beginning. Just because that's how I was raised. But I didn't realize like how I didn't understand why though. You know what I mean? Like I didn't understand what it even did to ourselves or yelling. Like yelling in my household when I was a kid was that's how you communicated was yelling. So, and knowing now like what yelling does, I mean, it was definitely gradual because again, I became a mom. I went into my marriage and my ex already had a kid. So I was a stepmom at 17. And then I had my first by the time I was 19. I was going to turn 20 in 6 weeks after my daughter was born. And then I mean, 22 when I had my twins. So it definitely was gradual, to say the least. They definitely felt it in the beginning.
Wow. So, how do you think have your children undertaken any therapy through this process?
Oh yeah. Since my ex-husband and I got divorced, like day 1, I was like, "You're in therapy," because I know what that did to me, like, "You're going into therapy," and they have not. I mean, we've taken, like, breaks, you know what I mean? But no, they've been in therapy for pretty much their whole life.
That's because that would also then give them somebody else to talk to if they've got something to share that they don't feel comfortable for whatever reason speaking to you, dad, or
Mhm.
your husband.
Yeah. No, absolutely, and I think, I think if you again, unpopular opinion, I think if you have your kids in therapy, you should be in therapy, because I think a lot of people, put their kids in therapy hoping it'll fix them, and it's like, you probably got some stuff you need to work on too if you think that they're the problem. But it takes a village, I go into my kid's therapist office and I'm like, what is happening? Like, how do I navigate this? How do I handle this? And it really helps me when I'm open to be able to learn how to communicate better for them. And ultimately that's the goal, right?
Yeah, to keep that dialogue open
Yeah,
and happening.
absolutely. It takes a
So,
village.
with your husband, and you said before that you basically, you said to him you wouldn't move in with him until he'd been in therapy for a year.
Mhm.
What was his initial reaction to that?
Not like he was not. It's kind of funny because his mom is a therapist, and his ex-wife was a social worker, and now I'm like all into that stuff too, but again, just showing the pattern, right? So it was definitely hard for him in the beginning, and I told him we would readdress like in a year, like talk about it and figure all that out, and he was the one who chose to keep going. He after a year he was like, "Yeah, I can see that I need it." And he hasn't stopped going since either.
So, do you and Daniel have catch ups? Do you do anything to make sure that you are keeping that dialogue open?
I mean, we talk. I am always, because since I do coaching and mentoring myself, I'm always so shocked to hear how little people really do talk to each other,
Mm.
and it breaks my heart. Um, and just because I know what that relationship is like when you don't talk and have that dialogue all the time, you know, but Daniel and I talk about everything. I mean, I love him so much. Like, he is my best friend. I am so thankful for him. I mean, we talk every day and night. Like, we start our morning without phones, snuggling and, you know, just asking how each other are, and then we go and make coffee together and make breakfast, and we make that time together. And I love my kids, but, like, when they go to bed, like, it's him and I. We play games, or we talk, or, we hang out. We have about once a month now, we give each other massages, like, full blown, like, just relaxing massages. Like, I just adore him. Like, he's the best. It's, like, so needed, and it's just nice because we get to connect,
Yeah.
like, on just, like, not like, and on an intimate level, but not even sexual, like, that we're just, like, showing up for each other. I've never had that before, and we cry together. Like, he's my person. Like, I can fully be vulnerable and trust him to show up for me and my emotions, and I know he feels the same way about me.
That is so nice, and it must be so nice for you to be able to say that you have found your person.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And in the beginning, there was stuff we like, because we actually talked about in the beginning of our relationship, we talked about how we know that we still trauma bonded, and how we've had to work through that too. And how easy it is for those things to, sometimes get brought back in. I mean, they creep in, right? And being aware of it and addressing it.
Very, very much so. So tell me, how has this impacted the work that you do?
Yeah. I mean, again, it's everything, right? Yeah, I mean, I'm, as much as I'd like to say that I wish none of that happened, right? Like, this is what's helped me help others. And now I'm able to use the tools and resources that I've gained to give that to other people and let them be able to show up for themselves now. Because just like I was saying, in the beginning of our conversation, those core beliefs that we have about ourselves and how that's how I'm viewing the world, that's how I view you, that's how you view me. And again, if we don't work on those core beliefs, it's almost like I like to use, have you ever seen National Treasure?
Yes, yes. Watched it for the
Okay.
first time just last
Oh
week.
my gosh. Look, this is perfect. It was meant to be. But you know those glasses that he has that they like flip
Yes.
the
Yep.
colors? That's like what we do with our core beliefs, right? Like if I accidentally hit a wound for you or vice versa, and I have like all these like flickering core beliefs running through, like that's how I'm going to interact with you. And so once we're able to figure it out and give ourselves what we need for the right combination, then we can view the world differently and say like,
Yeah.
oh, like, well, maybe something's coming up for her, right? Like if she's acting that way and being able to equip these, most of the time I'm working with women, equip women to be able to go out and have those tools for themselves.
And to be able to identify it.
Yeah, well, we have 3 different sets of core beliefs. So there's the I am section, which is, I am not enough or I'm defective, something's wrong with me. Then there's the trust area of the world. So either I can't trust myself or I can't trust others or I can't rely on others. Or there's powerlessness, like I can't do anything to control this and I'm powerless to stop this. So when we have these different kinds of beliefs, and if we have all 3, which there are situations for myself too, I can think of myself in a category of all of those, that can be really debilitating and scary. And that's when we get into trouble, is when we feel like something's wrong with me, I can't trust myself or others, and I can't do anything to change it. Like,
Yeah.
that's rough. And so I give women the tools on how to change that to be able to go and help themselves and help others, right? Like when we're able to live that way.
Yeah. And to grow.
Mhm.
One last question for you, Abigail. What do
Yeah.
you think the secret to your relationship is?
Mm. I mean, I don't think it's a secret. I think that, it's a mixture, I guess, of, you know, not letting pride get in my way and being able to be vulnerable and working on myself, being able to accept accountability when I've done something wrong and, also be able to show up too. I mean, that's hard to say a secret. You know what I mean? Like it's just so much more than a secret.
It is, but for others, it's finding that missing ingredient.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's so much that I appreciate about all of that. Again, the conversation and the showing up and, I think that depends on what wounds we have too, right? When that helps us know what our secret ingredient is I guess knowing ourselves, because then we're able to fully communicate what we need as well. Because if we don't know what we need, then we don't know. Then we can't communicate it.
Yeah. Yep. We're flying blind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Relationship Talks. If you can, I would love for you to jump on and leave a review. And whilst you are at it, don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please join me again next week when we get to take a look behind closed doors at someone else's relationship. But until then, I am your host, Laurie Brooke, and remember the choice is yours, so make today and the week the very best it can be.